September 29th, 520 to BC, a fortress in Media, in what is now modern-day Iran. It is the middle of the night. The air is cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. 7 men are creeping through the hallways of the royal palace. They aren't thieves. They aren't assassins hired by a foreign power. They are the highest-ranking nobles in the Persian Empire. They are dressed in the finest silks, but tonight, those silks are covered by heavy cloaks, and beneath those cloaks, their hands are sweating on the hilts of their daggers. They are here to kill the king of the world. They move past the guards who recognize them, guards who bow to them, unaware that they are letting the executioners in. They reach the royal bedchamber. They burst through the doors. The king is there. Or, at least, the man sitting on the throne looks like the king. He looks exactly like Berdia, the son of the legendary Cyrus the Great. But these 7 men know a secret. They know, or at least, they claim to know, that this man is a fraud. A phantom, a wizard who has stolen the face of a dead prince. The king jumps up. He grabs a bow. He fights back. It's a desperate, frantic brawl in a dark room. One of the 7 nobles, a man named Darius, tackles the king. They crash to the floor, wrestling in the shadows. Another noble stands over them, dagger raised, hesitating. It's too dark. He can't tell who is the king and who is his friend. Strike! Screams Darius from the floor, grappling with the target. I'm afraid I'll hit you, the other man shouts. Strike anyway, Darius yells back, and hope you kill the Magian. The blade comes down, it misses the noble. It finds the king's gut. The man on the floor gasps, convulses, and dies in a pool of blood. The man holding the bloody knife stands up. He is 28 years old. He has intelligent eyes, a strong jaw, and an ambition that is about to swallow the known world. He is not the heir. He is not a prince. He is a spear-bearer. His name is Darius. And he has just murdered the king of Persia. Now, usually, when you murder a king, you're the villain. But Darius is about to pull off the greatest PR stunt in human history. He is going to convince the world that the man he just stabbed wasn't the king at all, but an evil wizard named Gomata. He is going to claim that he didn't commit treason. He saved the empire. Is it true? Or was it the big lie of the ancient world? To understand how we got to this bloody room, and how Darius rose from a soldier to the king of kings, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the giant shadow that loomed over everyone in this story, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was the man. He was the George Washington, the Alexander, and the Messiah of the Persian Empire all rolled into one. He took a small tribe of Persians and conquered the Medes, the Lydians, and the Babylonians. He created the Achaemenid Empire, the first true superpower. He was tolerant, he was brilliant, and he was loved, but Cyrus had a problem. He had 2 sons. The eldest was Cambyses, the younger was Berdia. When Cyrus died in 530 BC, Cambyses took the throne. Now, history mostly written by Greeks who hated him remembers Cambyses as a mad king. They say he was violent, unstable, and mocked the gods. He famously conquered Egypt, which was a massive achievement, but the stories say he killed the sacred Apis bull and laughed at Egyptian religion. But Cambyses had a secret fear. He was terrified of his little brother, Berdia. Berdia was popular. Berdia was handsome. Berdia was back home in Persia, making friends, while Cambyses was sweating in the Egyptian desert. According to the official story, the story Darius would later tell, Cambyses grew so paranoid that he secretly ordered a hit on his own brother. He sent an assassin to Persia who quietly murdered Berdia and buried him in secret. Nobody knew, not the court, not the people, not even the dead prince's mother. So, Cambyses is in Egypt, thinking his throne is safe. But then, in 520 to BC, a messenger arrives with terrifying news. King Cambyses, the messenger says, shaking, "Your brother Berdia has seized the throne in Persia." The people are flocking to him. He has declared himself king. Cambyses freezes. He knows he killed his brother. He saw the proof. So who or what is sitting on his throne? The official story gets weirder here. Darius claims that the man on the throne was a Magian priest named Gomata. Gomata was a wizard who just happened to look exactly like the dead Prince Berdia. Identical twins, but unrelated. The only difference, Gomata had no ears. Years ago, Cyrus the Great had cut them off as punishment for a crime. So, you have an earless wizard impersonating a dead prince, ruling the largest empire on Earth. Cambyses, realizing the nightmare he's in, jumps on his horse to ride back to Persia and kill the impostor. But in his haste, he accidentally stabs himself in the thigh with his own sword. The wound gets gangrenous. 11 days later, Cambyses is dead. The impostor is now the undisputed king. This is the world Darius steps into. Darius was a distant cousin of the royal family. A nobleman, sure, but not in line for the throne. He was serving in the army in Egypt when Cambyses died. He saw the chaos. He saw the opportunity. He rode back to Persia. He found 6 other nobles who were suspicious of the new king. They met in secret. This is like a heist movie. You have Otanes, the wealthy insider. Gabryas, the warrior. Intiphrines, the hothead. And then you have Darius. Herodotus, the Greek historian, gives us a dramatic transcript of their meeting. Otanes wants to be cautious. He wants to gather more allies. He wants to wait. Darius looks at him and says, essentially, if we wait, we die. Someone in this room will crack. Someone will sell us out for a reward. We have to strike now. Otanes argues, but the palace is guarded. How do we get in? Darius replies with a line that tells you everything you need to know about his character. He says, there are many guards who know who I am. I will tell them I have a message from the king's father. I will lie. When a lie is necessary, let it be spoken. That is Darius. Pragmatic, ruthless, fast. He bullies the other 6 into action. They storm the palace. They kill the eunuchs guarding the door. They rush the bedroom, and, as we saw, they butcher the man on the throne. Now, let's pause. Was it really a wizard? Modern historians are skeptical. Think about it. A look-alike wizard? Who manages to fool the dead prince's wives? Who fools the court? It sounds like a fairy tale. The more likely reality, Cambyses never killed his brother. The man on the throne was Berdia. He revolted against his unpopular brother. The people loved him. He suspended taxes for 3 years. He was a populist. Darius and his 6 friends weren't saving the empire from a wizard. They were a junta. They were assassinating the legitimate king to seize power for themselves. And the Gomata the Magian story, that was the cover-up. That was the fake news designed to justify regicide, but history is written by the winners. And Darius won, so the wizard is dead. The 7 conspirators are standing over the body, wiping blood off their swords. Now they have a new problem. Which one of them gets to be king? They are all powerful. They are all equals. They can't fight a civil war amongst themselves, or the empire will collapse. They need a fair way to decide. They agree on a test. A test that sounds ridiculous to modern ears, but was deadly serious to the Persians, who worshipped the sun and horses. They agreed to meet the next morning at sunrise on the outskirts of the city. They would all mount their horses. The man whose horse neighed first after the sun rose would be the king chosen by God. This brings us to Obears, Darius's groom. He's the unsung hero or the cheater of this story. According to legend, Darius goes to Obears the night before and says, "Look, my horse needs to neigh first. Make it happen." Obears nods. "Leave it to me, boss." There are 2 versions of what Obears did. The polite version is that he took Darius's stallion to a spot where a mare had been earlier, so the scent would excite him. The Less polite version, recorded by Herodotus, is that Ober's rubbed his hand on the genitals of a mare, kept his hand inside his tunic all night, and then, just as the sun rose, he shoved his hand under the stallion's nose. The sun broke the horizon. Ober's produced the scent. Darius's horse went crazy and let out a massive, thundering whinny. Lightning flashed from a clear sky, or so Darius claimed later. The other 6 nobles, terrified by the omen and the horse, jumped down and bowed in the dirt. Hail, King Darius! And just like that, thanks to a knife in the dark and a horny horse, Darius was the king of kings. But seizing the throne is one thing. Keeping it is another. Darius had committed the ultimate sin. He wasn't the direct heir. He had killed a man who, wizard or not, the people believed was the son of Cyrus. The moment news spread that Brdia was dead and some general named Darius was wearing the crown, the empire exploded. It wasn't just a protest. It was a total collapse. Babylon revolted. They crowned a man who claimed to be the son of the last Babylonian king. Elam revolted. Media revolted. Assyria revolted. Egypt revolted. Parthia, Margiana, Satygidia, Scythia. Imagine the U.S. president is assassinated, and suddenly Texas, California, New York, and Florida all declare independence on the same day, while foreign armies invade the borders. That was Darius's first week on the job. Most men would have packed their bags and run to India. Darius didn't flinch. He didn't have the whole army. He only had a small core of loyal troops, the Immortals, and the nobles who helped him. He had to be everywhere at once. This is where Darius earns the title the Great. In one single year between 522 and 521 BC, Darius fought 19 battles. He didn't just fight them. He commanded the logistics, the strategy, and the movement of armies across thousands of miles of mountains and deserts. He split his forces. He sent his co-conspirators, his generals, to different corners of the map. Go to Armenia and smash the rebels. Go to Babylon and take the city. He was brutal. When he captured the rebel leader of Media, a man named Phraates, he didn't just execute him. He cut off his nose. He cut off his ears. He cut out his tongue. He chained him to the palace gate like a dog for weeks so everyone could see him, and then he crucified him. He wanted the world to know the price of rebellion is not death. It is hell. He marched on Babylon himself. The Babylonians were tough. They mocked him from the walls. They shouted, "You will capture this city when mules give birth." Darius besieged them for a year and a half. Finally, through a trick involving a high-ranking noble mutilating himself to pretend to be a defector, the Persians really loved the fake defector trick. They opened the gates. Darius impaled 3,000 of the leading citizens. Babylon was broken. One by one, the fires were put out. The liar kings, as Darius called them, were hunted down, chained, and executed. By 521 BC, the dust settled, the screams faded. Darius stood atop the Zagros Mountains, the master of a pacified, terrified, and reunited empire. But he knew that swords wouldn't keep him on the throne forever. He needed something stronger than steel. He needed truth, or rather, his version of it. He ordered a massive cliff face in Behistun, western Iran, to be carved. He wanted it high up 300 feet off the ground so no one could vandalize it. He commissioned a life-sized relief sculpture. It shows Darius standing tall, holding a bow, his foot on the chest of the wizard Gomata. Behind Gomata are 9 other figures, roped together by their necks, hands bound behind their backs. These were the 9 liar kings he defeated in that first year. And around the carving, in 3 different languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, he wrote his autobiography. I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king in Persia, king of countries, ... He lists the battles. He lists the enemies. And he repeats over and over again the central theme of his reign. These men lied. They said, I am the king. I did not lie. I spoke the truth. By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I did this. He mentions the lie Draga in Persian dozens of times. In Zoroastrian religion, the lie is the force of evil, chaos, and darkness. Truth Arta is order, light, and rightness. Darius wasn't just claiming to be a political winner, he was claiming to be a holy warrior. He framed the civil war not as a power struggle, but as a cosmic battle between good Darius and evil the liars. It was a master stroke. He legitimized his usurpation by making it a religious duty. By 520 BC, the wars were over. The usurper was now the undisputed king, but Darius looked at his empire a sprawling, chaotic mess of different languages, currencies, and laws and realized that conquering it was the easy part, running it. That was the hard part. Cyrus had been the conqueror, Cambyses had been the warrior. Darius realized he needed to be something else. Something boring, but powerful. He needed to be the shopkeeper, the architect, the administrator. He looked at the map and said, I am going to reorganize the entire world. And he did. But to do it, he would need to build a city that would make Babylon look like a village. He would need to invent a new way of handling money. And he would need to create a spy network that would make the CIA jealous. The soldier was gone. The builder was about to begin. By 518 BC, Darius had put down the sword and picked up the ledger. He looked at his empire stretching from the sands of Libya to the Indus River in India and saw a logistical nightmare. Under Cyrus, the empire had functioned like a protection racket. The Persians would show up, conquer a place, and say, give us gifts and we won't burn your city down. It was informal. It was unpredictable. Darius changed the game. He didn't want gifts. He wanted taxes. He divided the empire into 20 distinct provinces called satrapies. Each one was ruled by a satrap, a governor, usually a Persian noble or relative. But Darius was smart. He knew that if you give a governor too much power, he becomes a king. So he split the power. The satrap ran the civil administration, but the military commander of the province answered directly to Darius. And the tax collector, he answered to Darius too. It was a system of checks and balances designed to prevent anyone from doing exactly what Darius had done, overthrow the king. But he didn't stop there. He created the king's eyes and the king's ears. These were royal inspectors' secret police who traveled unannounced to the provinces to audit the books and report on loyalty. Everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest satrap, knew that the king was watching. Then he tackled the economy. Before Darius, trade was a mess. Every city used different weights, different measures, different lumps of silver. Darius introduced the daric. The daric was a gold coin. It was 95% pure gold, weighing about 8.4 grams. It had a picture of Darius on it, running with a bow and spear. It was the first international currency. Suddenly, a merchant in India could sell spices to a merchant in Greece using a standard coin. Trade exploded. The economy boomed. Darius became the wealthiest man who had ever lived. But how do you move all that money? How do you move armies across a continent? You build a road. The royal road was the interstate highway system of the ancient world. It ran 1,600 miles from Susa in Iran to Sardis in modern Turkey. It was paved. It had guard posts. It had hotels, caravanserai for travelers. And it had the world's first express postal service. Herodotus wrote the famous line about Darius's couriers. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Sound familiar? The U.S. Postal Service borrowed it. A normal traveler took 3 months to travel the road. Darius's messengers could do it in 7 days. They had relay stations every 15 miles with fresh horses. A message from the Aegean Sea could reach the king's desk in Persepolis faster than a message could cross most European countries in the 18th century. But Darius wasn't just an administrator, he was a showman. He knew that power is 50% reality and 50% perception. He needed a stage to display his glory. He built Susa. He expanded Babylon. But his masterpiece was Persia. The Greeks called it Persepolis, the city of the Persians. He built it in a remote valley in the heart of the Persian homeland. It wasn't a strategic fort, it was a ceremonial capital. It was built on a massive terrace cut into the side of a mountain. The scale is hard to comprehend. The Apadana. The audience hall had a roof supported by 36 columns, each 60 feet tall. The tops of the columns were carved into massive bulls and lions. The walls were covered in gold leaf and precious stones. But the most telling part of Persepolis is the art. In Assyrian palaces, the art is all about violence. Kings cutting off heads, flaying prisoners, hunting lions. It's terrified propaganda. In Persepolis, there is almost no violence. Instead, the reliefs on the stairs show a procession. They show representatives from all 23 subject nations bringing gifts to the king, Ethiopians with ivory, Indians with gold dust, Scythians with horses, Greeks with wool. They aren't being dragged in chains. They are walking hand in hand with Persian ushers. They look dignified. This was the Pax Persica, the Persian peace. Darius was selling the idea that the empire wasn't a tyranny. It was a global brotherhood ordered by truth, protected by the king. I am strong, he was saying, so you can be safe. Of course, if you didn't want to be part of the brotherhood, the violence came back pretty quickly, which brings us to the expansion. Darius wasn't content with the empire he inherited. He wanted more. He pushed east into the Indus Valley, conquering part of India. He pushed west into Thrace, modern Bulgaria. But his most ambitious and bizarre campaign was against the Scythians. The Scythians were nomadic horse archers who lived on the steppes of modern-day Ukraine and Russia. They were wild, impossible to catch, and terrifying. They had raided the Persian borders for years. In 513 BC, Darius gathered a massive army. 700,000 men, according to Herodotus, probably an exaggeration, but it was huge. He marched them to the Bosporus Strait, the strip of water separating Asia from Europe. He hired a Greek engineer named Mandrakles to build a bridge of boats across the strait. Darius marched his army from Asia into Europe. Then he marched them north across modern Bulgaria and Romania, all the way to the Danube River. He built another bridge of boats and crossed into Ukraine. His goal: force the Scythians to fight a pitched battle and crush them. But the Scythians were smart. They knew they couldn't beat the Persian heavy infantry in a stand-up fight, so they just ran away. They rode north into the endless grass of the steppe. They burned the grass behind them. They poisoned the wells. They destroyed the food supplies. Darius's massive army was marching into a wasteland. They were hungry. They were thirsty. They were chasing a ghost. Every time Darius stopped and built a camp, the Scythian horsemen would ride by, shoot a few arrows, yell insults, and ride away before the Persians could catch them. Darius grew frustrated. He sent a messenger to the Scythian king, Idanthyrsus. "Why are you running?" Darius asked. "If you are strong enough, stand and fight. If you are weak, send me earth and water as a token of submission." The Scythian king sent a reply that is one of the greatest drop-the-mic moments in history. He sent Darius 4 items: a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. No note. Darius, ever the optimist, said, "Aha, the mouse lives in the earth. The frog lives in the water. The bird flies in the air. They are surrendering their land, water, and air to me. And the arrows mean they are giving up their weapons." One of Darius's advisors shook his head. "No, my king, I think it means unless you can fly like a bird, burrow like a mouse, or swim like a frog, you will never escape this land, and we will kill you with these arrows." The advisor was right. The campaign was a disaster. Sickness was spreading. The army was starving. Darius, the logistical genius, realized he had been outplayed. He had to retreat. He left the sick and wounded behind in the camp with the campfires burning to trick the Scythians into thinking the army was still there. Then, under the cover of night, he marched the rest of his army back to the Danube bridge as fast as he could. He barely made it. The Scythians were hot on his heels, trying to beat him to the bridge and destroy it, trapping him in Europe. Darius crossed the bridge just in time and burned it behind him. He had lost thousands of men. He had failed to conquer Scythia. It was a humiliating check on his power, but Darius spun it. He claimed he had secured the northern border. He went home and added Scythians beyond the sea to his list of subject peoples on his tomb, even though he never actually conquered them. But the Scythian adventure was just a prelude. The real trouble was brewing in the west, the Greeks. The Greek cities on the coast of Turkey, Ionia, were Persian subjects. But they were restless. They hated the Persian-appointed tyrants who ruled them. They hated paying taxes, and they looked across the Aegean Sea at their cousins in Athens and Sparta who were free. In 499 BC, the Ionians revolted. They kicked out the Persian tyrants. They declared democracy. And they asked for help. Sparta said no. Sparta was too far away, and they didn't care, but Athens said yes. Athens sent 20 ships, not a huge fleet, but a symbol. The Athenians landed in Turkey, joined the rebels, and marched on Sardis, the Persian capital of the region. They burned Sardis to the ground. The temple of Cybele, local goddess, was destroyed in the fire. When Darius heard the news in Susa, he was furious. He didn't care about the Ionians. He could crush them, and he did, eventually. He was furious about the Athenians. Who were these people? Who were these upstarts from a tiny, rocky peninsula who dared to burn a Persian city? According to legend, Darius asked for his bow. He shot an arrow into the sky toward the west. He prayed to Ahura Mazda, "Grant that I may punish the Athenians." Then he gave an order to one of his servants. Every night, Darius commanded, "When I sit down to dinner, you will whisper in my ear 3 times, 'Master, remember the Athenians.'" For 10 years, the servant whispered. For 10 years, Darius planned. He wasn't just going to burn Athens. He was going to conquer all of Greece. He was going to punish them for their insolence. In 490 BC, the fleet was ready. The army was ready. The Marathon campaign was about to begin. Darius was an old man now in his 60s, but his anger hadn't faded. He stayed in Persia, sending his best generals, Datis and Artapernes, to execute his will. He expected an easy victory. The Persians had the numbers. They had the cavalry. They had the ships. The Greeks were squabbling, divided city-states. The Persian fleet island hopped across the Aegean. They burned Eretria, another city that had helped the rebels. They enslaved the population. Then, they landed at the Bay of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians were terrified. They sent a runner, Phidippides, to Sparta to beg for help. The Spartans said, "Sure, we'll help. But we have a religious festival right now. We can't march until the full moon." Athens was alone. 10,000 citizen soldiers against the might of the Persian Empire. Darius, sitting in his palace in Susa, waited for the good news. He waited for the ships to return with Athenian slaves in chains, but the news didn't come. Instead, a messenger eventually arrived with a story that seemed impossible. The Athenians hadn't surrendered. They hadn't hidden behind their walls. They had charged. They had run down the beach at Marathon, smashed into the Persian line, and pushed the invaders into the sea. 6,400 Persians died. Only 192 Athenians fell. The Persian fleet had retreated. The expedition was a failure. Darius was stunned. The God King, the master of millions, had been beaten by a democracy the size of one of his smaller provinces. The whisper came again at dinner. "Master, remember the Athenians?" But now it wasn't a reminder of vengeance. It was a reminder of failure. Darius didn't explode. He didn't cry. He did what he always did. He started planning. Prepare a bigger army, he ordered. Prepare all the ships, empty the granaries. We go again. And this time, I will lead them myself. For 3 years, the whole of Asia hummed with the sound of preparation. This wasn't going to be an expedition. This was going to be an annihilation. But time is the one enemy even the King of Kings can't defeat. In 486 BC, just as the army was gathering, Egypt revolted again. Darius had to delay the Greek invasion to deal with the Egyptians. And then his body began to fail. He was 64 years old. He had been campaigning, writing, and ruling for 36 years. The shopkeeper was tired. In October 486 BC, Darius the Great fell ill. After a month of sickness, the man who stole the throne, built the roads, invented the money, and carved his truth into the mountains, took his last breath. He never saw Athens burn. He left that task and that failure to his son, Xerxes. But Darius left something behind that was far more durable than a burnt city. Darius was buried in a tomb he had carved for himself years earlier at Naxirostum, just a few miles from Persepolis. It's a breathtaking sight, a massive cross shape cut into a sheer cliff face. High above the ground, there is a relief carving. It shows Darius standing on a 3-tiered platform. He is facing a fire altar, his hand raised in worship to Ahura Mazda, the winged god hovering above him. Beneath the platform, holding him up, are rows of figures representing the nations of the empire. They are lifting him, not in fear, but in support. It is the perfect image of how Darius wanted to be remembered, the pious king supported by a diverse world, upholding the truth. But what is the real legacy of the spear-bearer who became king? Usually, when we think of the Persian Empire, we think of the villains in the movie 300. We think of fierce tyrants, whip-cracking slave drivers, and faceless hordes trying to crush Western freedom. But that is the Greek version of the story, and the Greeks were biased. The reality is that Darius the Great was the true architect of the ancient world. Before Darius, empires were just looting machines. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, they came, they killed, they took the gold, and they left. Darius invented the idea of the universal state. He created a system where you could be an Egyptian, a Jew, a Greek, or an Indian, and still be a protected citizen of the empire. He allowed the Jews to finish rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, a project Cyrus started, but Darius funded and protected. He codified Egyptian laws. He respected local religions. He realized that tolerance wasn't just nice, it was profitable. People pay taxes more willingly if you don't burn down their temples. His administrative system, the satraps, the roads, the coinage, the postal service was so effective that Alexander the Great didn't change it when he conquered Persia 150 years later. Alexander just moved into Darius's palaces, took over Darius's treasury, and used Darius's roads to run the show. In fact, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and even the modern United States federal system owe a debt to the organizational blueprint Darius drew up in 520 BC. He was the first man to grapple with the problem of globalism. How do you rule a world that is full of different cultures, languages, and gods? His answer was centralized government, standardized economy, decentralized culture. A model that is still debated today, but there is a darker side to the legacy, too. Darius was a usurper. He seized power through murder and lies. He pioneered the use of propaganda to rewrite history. The Behistun inscription is the ancient equivalent of a deep fake video or a rigged election. He showed future dictators that if you repeat a lie often enough and carve it into a mountain, it becomes the truth. And, of course, there is the shadow of Greece. By starting the war with the Greeks, a war he left unfinished, he set in motion a conflict between East and West that would define history for centuries. The Persian Wars led to the rise of Athens, the Golden Age of Greece, and eventually the retaliation by Alexander the Great that destroyed the Persian Empire forever. If Darius had just ignored those burning temples in Sardis, if he hadn't whispered "remember the Athenians" every night at dinner, the world might look very different today. In the end, Darius was a man of contradictions. He was a murderer who brought law and order. He was a tyrant who practiced religious tolerance. He was a visionary builder who left a legacy of war. But perhaps the best summary of his life comes from the inscription on his tomb. It's a warning written in his voice, speaking to anyone who might come after him, whether a king or a commoner. He writes, "I was not hot-tempered. What things developed in my anger, I held firmly under control by my thinking power. I am firmly ruling over my own impulses. Oh man, that which is the command of Ahura Mazda, let this not seem repugnant to you. Do not leave the right path. Do not rise in rebellion. It's the voice of the ultimate control freak, the man who tamed the horse, tamed the empire, and tried to tame history itself. He couldn't conquer the Scythians. He couldn't conquer the Athenians, but he conquered chaos. And for 200 years, the world lived in the house that Darius built. When Alexander the Great finally reached Persepolis in 330 BC, he sat on Darius's throne. He walked through Darius's halls. And then, in a drunken rage, or perhaps a calculated symbolic act, Alexander burned Persepolis to the ground. The wooden roofs caught fire, the gold melted. The magnificent columns collapsed, but the stone remains. And high up on that cliff in Naxirostom, the ghost of Darius still stands, hand raised, watching over the dust of his empire, reminding us that while palaces burn and dynasties fall, the ambition of a single man can reshape the world forever.